The silent chamber. The hall was vast and cold, filled with the quiet hum of ancient machines. Tall pillars carved with glowing alien runes rose toward the ceiling like frozen giants. At the center of the chamber lay the alien princess, her body resting on a silver bed, her chest rising only faintly. The light in her skin flickered like a dying star. Dim and weak, the royal family stood in silence around her, their faces tight with grief, their eyes heavy with sorrow. He, the human, stood at the edge of the room, out of place and unwanted. He had been pulled here by mistake, a guard dragging him in when healers had failed. The human had no special skills, no knowledge of medicine, no reason to stand in a royal chamber, yet here he was, trembling under the weight of alien eyes. Every figure in the room seemed taller, stronger, more radiant than him, but none of them could stop the slow fading of the princess. The queen's voice broke the silence. Soft but filled with despair, "She slips away," she whispered. Clutching her daughter's cold hand, the king lowered his head, his jeweled crown trembling as his body shook. Even the guards, trained to show no emotion, looked away in sorrow. Hope was gone, and the air grew heavy with finality. The human shifted uncomfortably, his heart beating like a drum. He did not belong here. He wanted to step back, to vanish into the shadows, but his eyes were drawn to the fragile hand of the princess, lying still beside her body. Her skin was pale, her veins dim, her breath shallow and broken. Something inside him stirred. Something he did not understand, almost without thinking. His hand moved. It was a small motion, clumsy and nervous. His fingers brushed against hers. The briefest touch, nothing more than a mistake. And then the chamber changed. A faint glow leapt from his skin to hers, golden and warm. The princess's chest rose with a deeper breath, air rushing into her lungs with a sound that echoed through the chamber. Her lips parted slightly, as though tasting life again. The pillars carved with runes flickered brighter. As if answering her awakening, gasps filled the air, breaking the silence like shattering glass. The queen fell back in shock, her eyes wide, tears streaming down her face. The king stumbled a step, gripping his throne for support. "The light," someone whispered, their voice trembling. "It returns." The human jerked his hand away, staring at his palm as though fire had touched it. I didn't mean," he stammered, his voice weak and uncertain, but all eyes were fixed on him. No one blinked. No one moved. Even the guards who moments ago despised his presence now looked at him with something new. Fear and awe. The princess's breath continued, steady and soft. A faint glow pulsed in her veins, light spreading beneath her skin like dawn breaking through the horizon. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips trembled, and then a whisper escaped her throat, fragile but clear. "Light stays." The queen dropped to her knees, sobbing openly. The king raised both hands to his chest, eyes shining with wet disbelief. The younger siblings gasped and clung to each other, their faces torn between joy and fear. The chamber that had been filled with despair now trembled with a different kind of silence. It was not the silence of death, but the silence of a miracle. The human stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. He was no healer, no chosen warrior, no savior. He was simply human, yet his touch had done what no alien healer, no ancient machine, no sacred ritual could achieve. The family watched him, torn between hope and suspicion. Whispers filled the air, sharp and urgent. Who is he? What is he? Why does his touch bring life? The human wanted to run, to flee from their burning eyes, but something inside told him to stay. This was not an accident, not a simple mistake. It was the beginning of something larger, something he could not yet understand. The princess stirred again, her breathing stronger, her skin warmer. She turned her head slightly, her weak gaze meeting his for only a moment. In her eyes he saw gratitude, fear, and something more, something that tied his fate to hers. The glow around her pulsed once more, filling the chamber with soft light. The air grew warmer, the silence heavier. The human's heart thundered in his chest. He had come here by accident, led by mistake, but now, every royal in the room looked at him not as an intruder, but as the one who had touched death and turned it back. The one who had changed everything with nothing more than a brush of his hand. And as the chamber settled into silence again, one truth became clear. His life and the fate of the princess were now bound together, forever changed by a single accidental touch. The shock of life, the chamber did not breathe. Yet every heart within it thundered louder than drums. The alien princess, who only moments before had been slipping into death, now drew breath with growing strength. Her chest rose and fell like a flame rekindled, fragile yet undeniable. Her veins shimmered faintly, golden light weaving beneath her skin. It was not the pale glow of her people's blood, but something new, something strange. The royal family stared as if the world itself had broken. The queen leaned closer, clutching her daughter's hand as if afraid it might vanish again. "She lives," she whispered, her voice cracking. "By the stars. She lives." The king's jaw tightened, torn between joy and suspicion, his sharp eyes never leaving the human. He wanted to believe, yet kings did not bow to chance. A miracle without reason was no miracle at all. It was a threat. The human stood frozen, his palms sweaty, his throat dry. He wished he could explain, but no words came. "I only touched her," he murmured almost to himself. "I didn't do anything." But the words sounded hollow, lost in the weight of what had just happened. The guards stepped forward, their weapons half raised. Uncertain whether to protect him or strike him down, the queen lifted her hand quickly, stopping them with a single command. "No," she said firmly. "Not yet." The princess's eyes fluttered again. Slow as the dawn, her lips parted, her voice soft, fragile, but filled with undeniable life, warmth. She whispered. The sound struck her family harder than any weapon. Her younger brother fell to his knees. Covering his face as tears fell freely. The princess had not spoken in weeks. Her silence had been the shadow of her death. Now a single word carried more power than the greatest speech. The human's breath caught in his chest. She had spoken not to them but to him. Her gaze drifting toward his face, it was weak, almost fading. Yet there was a connection in her eyes that no one else in the chamber could feel. It was as if she saw him, not just the stranger standing there, but the reason her heart still beat. The king stepped forward, his voice sharp like a blade. "Human," he said. "What trick is this?" The human shook his head quickly, his voice breaking. "No trick, I swear. I don't know why this happened." But his denial only deepened the mystery. If he did not know, then what was he? If this was not knowledge, was it power? And if it was power, then where had it come from? The queen touched her daughter's cheek gently, her voice low but steady. "There was a prophecy," she whispered, though her eyes never left the human. "Long ago, it was written that when the royal line faced its last breath, a stranger from the stars would awaken the light." Her words sent ripples through the chamber. Some gasped in awe, others shook their heads in disbelief. The king's face grew hard, his jaw locked as if fighting against hope itself. "Prophecies are stories," he spat, "and stories do not decide the fate of my bloodline," but deep inside, fear had already taken root. For what he saw before him was not story, not rumor, but living proof his daughter breathed. Because of a human's touch, the guards muttered, their voices carrying unease. Some bowed their heads in reverence, believing destiny had chosen this moment. Others gripped their weapons tighter, seeing the human as danger, not salvation. The air grew tense, thick with suspicion and awe. The human's chest tightened. He had never asked for this, never wanted to stand before alien royals. He had wanted only peace, survival, nothing more, but now, their eyes pressed against him like walls closing in. Every second felt heavier. He wanted to run. Yet something inside whispered that if he left now, she would slip back into the dark. The princess's hand twitched, her fingers curling weakly. The queen gasped and pressed closer. But the movement was not for her. It was for him. Her fingers reached, trembling, until they brushed the edge of his hand again. The glow pulsed brighter, and her breathing steadied. It was no mistake, no chance. Her body responded only to him. Gasps filled the air once more, the truth settling like thunder across the chamber. "She draws life from him," a guard whispered, his voice shaking. "She cannot live without his touch," another added. Fear cutting through his words, the king's eyes darkened. In his heart was both relief and dread, for if this was true, then their greatest treasure, the princess of the royal line, was tied to a creature they could not control. The human stepped back, trembling. "I don't want this," he said, shaking his head. "I don't want to be whatever this is." But the princess's weak grip tightened on his hand, refusing to let go, and in her eyes, even through the haze of weakness, he saw one truth: she did not want him to leave. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. Every alien in the chamber understood what this meant. The fate of their bloodline, their kingdom, their future was now bound to a human, a man who had done nothing but make a mistake. a man who had changed everything with a single brush of his hand. And as the golden glow pulsed once more through the veins of the princess, the royal family could only watch, torn between hope and terror, for they knew, whether they wished it or not, the stranger was now at the center of their destiny, the whispered prophecy. The chamber remained heavy with silence. But beneath that silence ran a current of whispers. The glow in the princess's veins still pulsed faintly. Tied to the human's presence, the royal family did not move, each member frozen in a storm of emotions. Hope had returned, but it was wrapped in fear. And in that fear came the old stories. An elder of the court stepped forward, his robes dragging softly across the stone floor. He was older than the king himself, his skin lined with age, his eyes holding the weight of memory. In his trembling hands he carried a scroll, sealed and faded with centuries of dust. "The prophecy," he murmured, his voice rasping. "It speaks of this moment." The king stiffened, his eyes narrowing. "I will not chain my throne to words of myth," he growled. But the queen's hand tightened on his arm, her gaze desperate, her voice sharp with conviction. "And yet she breathes," she whispered. "She breathes because of him." The elder unrolled the scroll, the faint light of the runes reflecting against its ancient ink. His voice carried, soft yet clear. "When the blood of the royal line runs cold, when the flame of the crown flickers into shadow, a hand from beyond the stars will awaken the dying light." He looked up, his eyes fixed on the human. "And the fate of our kind will be bound to the touch of the outsider." Whispers rippled through the chamber like a rising storm. Some bowed their heads, believing destiny had come to life before them. Others shook with unease, seeing not salvation but danger. The king's face grew darker, shadowed by doubt. "To bind our fate to a human is to surrender all we are," he muttered. Yet the proof lay before him, breathing weakly but alive. The human's heart raced as every eye turned toward him once more. He shook his head, his voice unsteady. "I don't know why this happened. I don't know what I am to you." His words sounded small in the vast chamber. But the princess's hand, still weak, still trembling, reached again for his. Her fingers curled against his skin, and the glow in her veins grew stronger. The truth could not be denied. The elder raised his voice, firm despite his age. "It is not chance, it is not trickery, it is written in the lines of time." He pointed at the human with a shaking hand. "This one is chosen." The king slammed his fist against the arm of his throne, the sound echoing like thunder. "Chosen or cursed?" he demanded, his voice heavy with anger. "If he is to hold the life of my daughter, then he must prove himself. He must show that he is not a danger hidden in flesh." His eyes cut toward the guards, and their grips on their weapons tightened. A chill filled the air. The queen rose quickly, her eyes wide with fear. "No," she said firmly. "He saved her. Without him, she would already be gone." But the king's gaze did not soften. "A life that depends on him is a chain around this kingdom," he declared. "If prophecy has bound us, then he must face trial. He must be tested." The human's breath caught in his chest. "Trial," he echoed, his voice uncertain. "What trial?" But no one answered him. Only the guards stepped closer, their shadows falling long across the floor. The princess stirred again, her weak voice trembling against the silence. "No harm," she whispered, but her plea was drowned beneath the weight of the king's command. "He will be tested," the king repeated, "for if he fails, he will not live to curse us further." The chamber erupted into voices, some in protest, some in support. The elder tried to speak again, but his words were lost in the storm. The queen clutched her daughter tightly, shielding her as if the decision might break her fragile life again. And the human stood in the center of it all, his mind a blur, his heart pounding against his ribs. He had not asked for this, not sought this. Yet fate had placed him here, and now his future was no longer his own. The elder's voice rose one last time, cutting through the chaos. "The prophecy speaks not only of the touch that brings life, but of the fire that must be endured." His eyes locked on the human, filled with sorrow and certainty. To awaken the light is not enough. The outsider must prove he can carry it, or else all will fall into shadow. The king's voice followed. "Hard as stone." "Then it is decided," he said, his gaze heavy with judgment. "Tomorrow the human will face the test of blood." The guards surrounded him, their weapons lowered but ready. The human felt the weight of their presence, the cold edge of destiny pressing against his skin. He looked once more at the princess, her eyes heavy with weakness, yet fixed on him with quiet pleading. Her hand slipped from his as the glow in her veins dimmed again, and in that moment he knew, whatever this trial was, whatever danger awaited, he could not walk away. Not while her life was tied to his own. The chamber dimmed once more, the silence heavy, but beneath that silence, a storm had already begun. A storm that would test not only the human, but the fate of an entire kingdom, the test of blood. The morning came with a sky of steel, heavy clouds pressing against the palace towers. The air inside the great hall was colder than the night, sharp with tension. Torches burned along the walls, their flames restless, as though they too feared what was about to come. The human stood at the center of the chamber, surrounded by guards whose faces showed no warmth. Only duty above them. The royal family sat in silence, the king leaning forward on his throne, eyes fixed on the outsider. The elder of the court stepped forward, scroll in hand, his voice echoing through the hall. "The test of blood," he announced, "is no ordinary trial. It is the measure of strength, of endurance, of will to survive against pain no creature should endure." His old hands trembled as he looked at the human. If he lives, he will be seen as chosen. If he fails, the light will die with him. The human swallowed hard, his throat dry, his heart a heavy drum inside his chest. He had not asked for this, had not chosen to be part of prophecy or trial. Yet the eyes of an entire kingdom were upon him, and somewhere above, in the shadow of her mother's arms, the princess watched with weak but desperate eyes. Her gaze alone kept his legs from collapsing beneath him. If he stepped away, she would fade again. He knew it deep inside. The guards led him into the circle drawn upon the floor, its markings glowing faint red. The scent of iron filled the air, bitter and sharp. From the far side of the chamber, 2 warriors entered, their armor carved with cruel edges, their blades glinting under the torchlight. They bowed only to the king, then raised their weapons. The human's chest tightened. This was not a test of words or faith, it was a test of survival. The king's voice carried over the silence. "Hard as stone, face the trial, outsider. Bleed if you must, suffer if you must, but prove that you are more than chance." The queen flinched at his words but did not speak. The elder lowered his head, whispering prayers in an old tongue. The warriors struck first, their movements sharp and merciless. The human barely leapt aside, the blade cutting close enough to tear his sleeve. His heart raced, his body weak compared to theirs. Every instinct told him to run, to surrender. But the circle glowed bright and strong. There was no escape. The trial demanded blood. A blade caught his arm, hot pain searing through his flesh. He cried out, stumbling back, his breath shallow. The crowd gasped, some in pity, others in satisfaction. The king's eyes narrowed, watching not with cruelty but with cold calculation. The princess gripped her mother's hand tighter, her glow flickering faint as if tied to his suffering. The human clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stand. He remembered her weak whisper, the words she had spoken. "Light stays," and so he stayed, even as the warriors closed in again. Pain flared once more as a blade grazed his side. Blood staining his torn shirt, he fell to his knees, his vision blurring. The chamber spun, the voices of the crowd fading into a storm of echoes. But deep inside something burned, not strength of muscle, not skill of blade, but the raw will of survival. He pushed against the ground, his palms slick with his own blood. He rose again, swaying but unbroken. Gasps rippled through the chamber as he faced the warriors once more. They circled him, striking with precision, each blow heavier than the last, each wound deeper. The trial was not meant to be fair, it was meant to break him. But with every strike, with every cut, the human refused to fall. The glow in the circle shifted, the red turning slowly to gold. The elder's eyes widened, whispering words no one else could hear at last. One warrior drove his blade across the human's chest, the pain white and blinding. The human collapsed, his body trembling, his blood pooling into the runes of the circle. The chamber fell silent, breath held in dreadful suspense. The king leaned forward, believing the trial had ended, but then the circle blazed with golden light, brighter than the torches, brighter than the runes on the walls. The human gasped, dragging himself to his feet once more. Every muscle screamed, every bone ached, yet he stood. His eyes lifted toward the royal dais, toward the princess whose faint glow answered his own. And with a voice broken but steady, he whispered, "I will not fall." The crowd erupted, some cheering, some crying out in fear. The warriors froze, blades lowered, for even they could not deny what they had seen. The circle no longer demanded his blood. It accepted it. The test had been endured not by strength but by sheer will. The elder raised his arms high, his voice ringing like thunder. He lives. The prophecy holds true. The queen covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The king clenched his fists, torn between fury and awe. The princess's glow grew stronger, her breath steadier, as if his survival had pulled her closer to life itself. The human staggered, nearly collapsing, but the golden circle held him upright. He had passed the test of blood, and though his body trembled with pain, his heart knew one truth. He could no longer deny the bond that tied him to the fading princess, and neither could her people. The hidden enemy. The chamber had fallen silent after the trial. The human's body was broken, but he still stood, and the circle of gold beneath his feet had accepted his blood. The prophecy could no longer be denied, even by the hardest hearts, yet as the crowd dispersed, not all eyes looked at him with awe. Some watched with shadows hidden deep, and in those shadows danger began to grow. That night, the palace halls whispered with voices of doubt. Some nobles spoke of destiny, calling the human a chosen savior. Others called him a curse, an outsider who had bound the princess's life to his own. To them, this was not salvation, but weakness, a chain around the neck of their throne. The king walked alone in his private chamber. Staring at the flame of a single torch, he could not escape the truth. His daughter lived because of the human, but in his heart pride battled against fear. To depend on an outsider was to risk the foundation of his rule, and to let the prophecy decide was to admit that he, the king, had no power over fate. The queen entered quietly, her steps soft on the stone floor. "You saw it with your own eyes," she whispered. "He endured what no one else could." The king's voice was low and bitter. "He is not one of us," he muttered. "He does not belong to this throne. Yet our future is tied to him." The queen placed a hand on his arm, her voice trembling with hope. And still, our daughter breathes far below the royal chambers. In the lower halls, others whispered with sharper tongues. A group of nobles gathered in secret, their faces cloaked in shadow, their voices sharp with malice. "If the human remains, the princess will rise, and the throne will bend to him," one hissed. "We cannot allow our bloodline to be tainted by his presence," another growled. A third leaned closer, his eyes glinting like steel. "Then the answer is simple. The human must not live long enough to see the dawn." Above them, the princess lay in her chamber, her body still weak but glowing with faint warmth, her eyes half closed, her breath shallow yet steady. At her side sat the human, his wounds bandaged, his body trembling with pain, but still he stayed. Every time he thought of leaving, her weak hand found his, and the glow in her veins grew stronger. He could not walk away, even if he wanted to. "Why me?" he whispered to himself in the quiet. The princess's lips parted, her voice soft but filled with fragile certainty. "Because light answers light," she murmured. He frowned, confused, yet her eyes told him what words could not. Something greater than chance had pulled them together. Outside the chamber, footsteps echoed in the hall. Not the steady tread of guards, but the hushed steps of those who did not wish to be heard. The human's head lifted, his instincts sharp despite his exhaustion. He rose slowly, every wound aching, and moved toward the door. He pressed his ear against the cold stone, listening. "Tonight," a voice whispered. "Strike while he is weak," another replied. "If he falls, she falls too," the first voice hissed. "And the throne will be ours." The human's heart pounded, his blood turning cold. They were not speaking of the princess, they were speaking of him. His death would not only end his life, but hers as well. The prophecy had not bound them in miracle alone, but in danger. Her survival was now his survival, and his survival was hers. He stepped back from the door. His chest tight, he looked at the princess, her fragile body resting against the pillows, unaware of the storm gathering beyond her walls. He clenched his fists, his wounds screaming with pain. For the first time since arriving in this place, he felt not only fear but anger. If they wished to end him, they would have to face him, and he would not fall so easily. The queen entered suddenly, her eyes searching, her face pale as if she too had heard whispers in the corridors. "They will move against you," she said quickly, her voice sharp. The human tensed. "Then why not stop them?" he asked. Her gaze dropped, sorrow clouding her expression. "Because some of them are family," she whispered. "And a king cannot strike his own blood without tearing the throne apart." The human stared, disbelief cutting through him. "They would rather kill me than see her live," he muttered. his voice low and bitter. The queen's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "They fear what they cannot control," she said. "But I beg you endure, for if you fall, she will fade again." That night, as shadows thickened and silence draped across the palace, the human did not sleep. He sat beside the princess, his eyes fixed on the door, his hand gripping the small blade the queen had pressed into his palm before she left. Every sound in the hall tightened his chest. Every whisper of wind felt like an enemy's breath. He knew they were coming. The hidden enemy was no longer whispering. They were waiting for the chance to strike. And in that moment, the human understood. This was no longer about accident or prophecy. This was survival. And he would not let her light die again, not while he still drew breath. The battle in the palace. The night inside the palace was heavy with silence. But it was not peace, it was the silence before a storm. The kind that made every flame flicker and every shadow stretch long across the walls. The human sat at the princess's side, his back straight despite the pain of his wounds. In his hand, hidden beneath his cloak, he gripped the short blade the queen had given him. His eyes never left the door. The princess stirred weakly, her pale fingers brushing against his hand. "Danger," she whispered, though her voice was faint, her body fragile. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "I know," he said under his breath. Her glow pulsed faintly through her veins, as though her life force itself was warning him. And then it came, the faint creak of the door, the shuffle of boots across stone. Shadows slipped inside, dark figures cloaked and masked, their blades glinting cold in the torchlight. They moved like hunters, silent and sure. But the human was already on his feet. The first assassin lunged, his blade striking for the human's chest. Steel met steel as the human raised his short blade, sparks flashing in the dark. Pain shot through his body as his wounded arm screamed, but he did not fall. He twisted, forcing the assassin back, his breath ragged but his will unbroken. The princess gasped softly, her glow flickering as if tied to his strength. The human's heart hammered. He could not let them reach her. Every step he took, every strike he blocked, was not for himself but for her. Another assassin slipped behind him. Blade raised high, the human spun, catching the strike with his arm, the steel cutting deep into his flesh. Blood poured, but he did not cry out. Instead, he shoved forward, ramming his shoulder into the attacker and driving him to the ground. The blade clattered against the floor, ringing like a warning bell through the chamber. The noise woke the guards outside, but the traitors had planned well. Another group of assassins rushed in, their blades already wet with the blood of loyal men in the halls. The human's chest tightened. He was surrounded, outnumbered, his strength fading with every breath. Yet when he looked back at the princess, her wide eyes filled with fear and trust. Something inside him burned hotter than pain. He raised his blade again, his stance unsteady but his will like iron. "If you want her," he growled, "you'll have to go through me." The assassins laughed bitterly, voices sharp with contempt. "Then bleed, human," one hissed, "and let the crown fall to those worthy of it." They charged together, blades flashing. The human blocked one, dodged another, pain ripping through his body as steel scraped his side. His vision blurred, but his hands moved faster than his thoughts. One strike cut across his shoulder, but in return, he drove his blade into an assassin's arm, sending him reeling back. The princess's glow flared suddenly, brighter than before. Her weak hand lifted from the bed, trembling as though invisible threads connected her life to his. Her light wrapped around him, faint but real. Every time his body threatened to collapse, the glow steadied him. Every breath he thought would be his last. The light gave him one more. The assassins faltered, their eyes widening as they saw it, the bond between human and princess. "It's true," one whispered in fear. "Her life flows through him." "Then kill him quickly," another snarled. But their voices shook, for they now fought not just a man, but the prophecy itself. The human roared, pushing forward with strength he did not know he still had. His blade cut across another assassin. His fist cracked into a masked face. Pain filled him, but he refused to fall. Each strike was clumsy, desperate, but powered by something no weapon could match. The will to protect. The door burst open again, this time not with assassins but with loyal guards. The queen herself rushed in behind them, her eyes wide with fury. "Seize them," she cried, her voice thundering across the chaos. The loyal guards clashed with the traitors, steel ringing against steel. The chamber became a storm of blades and blood. Through it all, the human remained at the princess's side, striking down any who dared come close. When the last assassin fell, silence returned, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. Blood stained the floor. Torches sputtered in the smoky air. The human swayed on his feet, his blade dripping red, his body broken but unbowed. The queen rushed to the princess, her hands trembling as she touched her daughter's face. "She still breathes," she whispered with relief, her eyes glistening, her gaze lifted to the human. And for the first time it was not only gratitude but awe that filled her eyes. The king arrived moments later, his face carved with fury as he looked upon the dead traitors. His eyes shifted to the human, bloodied but standing strong. For a long moment he said nothing. Then with a voice low and heavy he spoke. "You fought for her when others sought her death." The human's legs buckled, and he fell to his knees, but his eyes lifted, steady despite his exhaustion. "I told you," he whispered. "You'll have to go through me." The chamber fell quiet once more, and in that silence even the king could not deny it. The human was no accident, no chance. He was the shield fate had given to the princess. The choice of the princess. The palace was quiet after the battle, but the quiet was not peace. It was the silence of wounds, the silence of fear, and the silence of choices yet to be made. The dead had been carried away, the traitors executed, the halls scrubbed of blood, but no one could scrub away the memory of what they had seen. The human had stood against death itself, and lived. The princess lay in her chamber, her glow stronger now, her breath deeper than before. She was no longer fading, though her body was still weak. Her eyes, bright and alive, followed the human where he sat at her side, his own body bandaged and bruised. The bond between them was no longer rumor or doubt. It was truth seen by every eye in the palace. She breathed because of him, and he endured because of her. The king entered the chamber, his crown heavy upon his brow. Behind him walked the queen, the elder, and the nobles who had survived the night. Their eyes carried different truths, some with awe, some with fear, some with envy. But all knew this moment would decide the future. The human rose slowly, pain in every step but his gaze steady. He faced the throne, though he belonged to no crown. "I don't want power," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I didn't ask for this, I didn't plan for it. I only wanted to survive." He looked at the princess, her glowing eyes meeting his. "But if leaving means she dies, then I will not leave." The queen's face softened, her hand covering her heart. The elder lowered his head, whispering words of prophecy fulfilled. But the king's eyes remained sharp, torn between pride and fear. "You bind my daughter's life," he said coldly, "and through her you bind my throne." His words cut deep. But the truth was clear. The princess could not live without the human, and the kingdom could not live without the princess. The princess raised her hand weakly, her voice soft but carrying strength that had been absent for so long. "No," she said, her gaze never leaving her father. "He does not bind me, I choose him." The chamber froze, her words louder than any shout. The king's face darkened, but his daughter did not look away. "For days I was fading, slipping into shadow," she continued. "None of you could hold me, none of you could call me back. But when his hand touched mine, I breathed again." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was unshaken. Not by command, not by duty, not by crown, but by choice. Gasps rippled through the nobles, whispers sharp and fast. She had declared him not as accident, not as curse, but as protector. The king clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He could forbid her words, but he could not deny the truth in her glowing veins. The prophecy had not been chains, it had been choice, and his daughter had chosen the human. The queen stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Do you not see?" she said to the king. "The throne is not weakened by him, it is strengthened, for he brings what none of us could." Her eyes turned to the human, filled with gratitude. "He gave back the light we had lost." The elder raised his scroll, his voice steady as he recited once more. "When the flame of the crown flickers into shadow, a hand from beyond the stars will awaken the dying light, and the throne shall rise not by blood alone, but by the bond of choice." The chamber fell silent at his words. Even the harshest nobles lowered their heads, unable to deny that prophecy had lived before their very eyes. The king looked at his daughter, then at the human. His voice was heavy, carved from stone. "If this is your choice, then it is mine as well," he said at last. "But know this, human, if you betray her, if you fail her, you will not only face me, you will face the weight of an empire." The human bowed his head slightly, his voice steady despite the pain in his body. I understand, he said, and I will not fail her. The princess smiled faintly, her glow stronger, her breath steady. She reached for the human's hand again, and when their fingers touched, the chamber filled with light. It was not the faint flicker of survival, but the radiant blaze of life. The runes on the walls glowed brighter. The torches burned higher, the silence broke into awe. For the royal bloodline was alive again, and it had chosen its shield. The human stood by her side, no crown upon his head, no title upon his name. But in that moment, every eye in the chamber knew the truth. He was no accident, no curse. He was the one who had touched death and brought back life. And from that day, the princess would never be spoken of without his name bound to hers. And without him, she would already be gone.